everyone. Welcome to another episode of the JB Show. Today, I'm going to be talking about Rasmus Ristolainen of the Buffalo Sabres. Now, it's been rumored for the past couple weeks that Rasmus Ristolainen is going to be traded. The Sabres, since the draft, made two trades. Or they made three, but two defensive trades. They traded for Colin Miller, and they had to give up a 2021 second-round pick and a 2022 fifth-round pick. Now, Colin Miller is, some would argue, you can be your number 4 defenseman. Some would argue fifth defenseman. I think he's around the 4-5. And he'll probably end up playing on a third pairing. Maybe on Buffalo, he'll end up on the second, depending on how the team works out. Now, this is an interesting trade because it seemed that Vegas were literally ready to let go of him. He's on the second year of a 4-year deal at $3.875 million on a cap hit, and Vegas are basically over the cap, and oh boy, they still got a lot of work to do. They got a lot of some salary that they need to shed. And Colin Miller was one of those players where, you know what, he'd fit on their top 6, but he had to go. He wasn't even being played. He was not even being played. Last year, he played 6 playoff games. So obviously the coach didn't really like him. But I think he's a player that can play in your top as a 4-5 defenseman. And I have to assume that there were a lot of teams interested, including Toronto. And obviously, there's many other reasons that the Leafs didn't trade for him. I'm not going to get into it because that's not what we're talking about. But when I first looked at this trade, I'm like, wow. Just two picks. Not prospect, just 2 picks and a second and a fifth, which is, I wouldn't think, is a low price to pay. But there's literally so many reasons why it's low. And I think one of them is they're getting this player from Vegas. Not that Vegas is a team that just hands out players for free, but they're in a situation where, you know what? We're going to take a little bit of a lower price because we need to shed the salary. Now, the second trade, and this one surprised me. This one was a big surprise, not on the Buffalo end, but on the other team's end. The Buffalo Sabres acquired Henry Jokiharju from Chicago for Alex Nylander. Now, that's some argue that, that's a fine trade. I don't think it is. Now, he started the season in the AHL last year and ended up moving his way to the NHL, played 38 games with the club. And I think he has top 4 potential. There at the beginning of the season, or when he started playing in the NHL, there was a lot of people that were like, "Oh, he's going to be a top 2 D-man. He's going to play up there in the next few years." I think that was a little bit of a stretch. I think there was just a lot of hype. A new guy coming up. He's only 20, and he's in the second year, or he'll be going into the second year of his entry-level deal. But Alex Nylander, now I don't think he's panned out to be the player everyone thought he was going to be. Where he was drafted, which was 8th overall in the 2016 draft, you'd assume, he's at least a top 6 guy. Now, let me remind you, he's 21. I'm making a huge assumption and saying, he's not going to turn out to be a top 6 guy. We already saw what Chicago did with Dylan Strome, and I think they could probably do it again. Personally, I don't know what they see in Alex Nylander. He's an NHL player. I tweeted this out. as soon as I found out about the trade, I said Nylander's could be a good NHL player one day, fit in the middle, somewhere in the middle six. But based on all the hype, there's a lot of hype for Jokiharju, but I still value the defenseman in this trade higher than Nylander. I think it was quite interesting to see this trade for Buffalo because they have the defensemen. I want to know, why are they bringing all these defensemen? They have Rasmus. They still have Rasmus Ristolainen. They still have, who else do they have? They have Zach Bogosian, who's right-handed. They have Carl Miller. They still have Brandon Montour, who they brought in last year just before the trade deadline. So why are they bringing in all these defensemen? And my guess is they're trying to trade Rasmus Ristolainen. Now, he's quite an interesting player because you think he's a top 4D, but the analytics don't show that. Apparently, the analytics don't show that. Now, I'm not going to lie. I looked at those analytics, and half of them meant nothing. I didn't understand them. But it's interesting to see the debate between the people who use the eye test and the people who use the analytics, because over the years it's just been getting better and better, because the people who are looking at the eye test are starting to see that Rasmus Ristolainen isn't as good a player as they first thought he was, because I think they probably were giving him the benefit of the doubt. He's still 24. He's only 24 years old, and yes, he's entering his prime now, but he was still young. He's on the fourth year. This year will be the fourth year of a 6-year deal at a $5.4 million cap hit. Now, that's an interesting contract for certain teams. And I've come up with a list of 4 teams that he could potentially be traded to. And these are just kind of based on my thoughts. Now, one of them is there's just been major rumors that he's going there. And you know what? He can end up at a team that I don't actually talk about. Last season, he finished with 43 points. I know this is a weird, stupid stat, but finished with a plus-minus of -41. So it doesn't seem that he's as good as everyone thought he was. But there's teams that are going to look for him, because the same with other players I've mentioned in the last couple of years and the last couple of episodes. Certain players do better in different situations. Because right now, Rasmus Ristolainen for the last couple of years has basically been their first pairing defenseman. So, yeah, sure, he played with Rasmus Dahlin last year, but he's still not, that's not the type of player he is. It's evident. Sure, maybe when he was drafted, people thought, this is the player he can be. When he was drafted 8th overall in 2013, people thought that's the player he'll end up being, but that's not what happened. He's probably a 4-5 defenseman right now. Could he end? He's only 24, so he could end up as a 3. I find it hard to believe he'll end up as a 2. So, where is he going to be traded? Destination number 1, the Tampa Bay Lightning. Now, I know everyone's first question is, how are the Tampa Bay Lightning, how are they going to afford Rasmus Ristolainen? And to be honest, I have no idea. They currently have $5.5 million in projected cap space, and they still have to sign Braden Point. How are they going to do this? Now, here's what it comes down to. They're trying to get rid of salary. Even at 5.5, how are they going to sign Braden Point alone? Salary needs to be moved out. It's a mess. I would not be okay. Well, sorry, I forgot to mention. Right now they have 5.8 on the injured reserve because Ryan Callahan won't be playing anymore. So that's another 5.8. So about 10. We're just over 10 million. No, just over 11 million. So we're at 11 million. They still have to sign Braden Point. And they're looking to upgrade their D because they lost Anton Strawman to Florida. So how are they going to pull this off? Right now, their top four. Let's look at their top four. Victor Hedman, Mikhail Sergachev, first pairing. Ryan McDonough and Eric Cernak as their second pairing. Could there be improvements? Sure. You could. Rasmus Ristolainen's right-handed. I'd assume if they're smart, they're not going to replace him where they currently have Mikhail Sergachev, because that would not do any good, because now he's back in the same situation that he was before. He's playing top 2 minutes. Sure, he's playing with Victor Hedman. Yes, I understand he's playing with arguably a better player. Even with Ryan McDonough, right? He's playing with a better player, but he's been more suited for top 4 minutes. Now, who are the Tampa Bay Lightning going to give up? Right now, they have 2 first-round picks, their own, and the conditional pick that they got in the Vancouver trade. Now, if I am the Tampa Bay Lightning, if I'm moving a first-round pick, number one, I'm not including, I'm just throwing this out there. I'm not moving a first-round pick for Rasmus Ristolainen. I'm looking at players with big salaries. Yes, Andre Palat, 3 years left at 5.3. I don't think you're moving him. You could. You might. But I don't know if that's the guy you move. He also has a no-trade clause. I'm looking at this team. Okay. Steven Stamkos has a no-move clause, but he's not being moved. The 4 players that I'm looking at this, I'm saying these are the players that you probably trade, all have no trade clauses. Andre Palat, Yanni Gourde, who just started the extension he signed earlier this year, Tyler Johnson, and Alex Killorn. The 2 players that I'm really looking at are Tyler Johnson and Alex Killorn. Those are the players I look at and say, that's who I include in the deal. Because Tyler Johnson makes $5 million. Alex Killorn makes 4.45. So yes, I'm gaining salary essentially in both deals. But I don't see any other way. Okay, let's look at the defenseman. Who you're going to move? Victor Hedman, not moving, makes 7.875. For the foreseeable future. Ryan McDonough makes 6.75, has a no-trade clause, and as a left-handed D at the age of 30. You're not moving him either. In any scenario, you're gaining minimum $100,000 in salary. If let's say we're talking Andre Palat, because the defense I just named, those aren't options. Those players are not options to move because everyone else below McDonough, Braden Coburn at 1.7, Jan Ruta at 1.3, Mikhail Sergachev. Sure, move Mikhail Sergachev if you want to. I would not. I'm just throwing the names out there that are on their defense. So you're gaining salary unless you can manage to move the Ryan Callahan contract. But that doesn't have any effect. Because he's going to be thrown on to LTIR at the beginning of the year anyways. So who do you give up? Okay, let's say you're including one of the 4 players, probably Tyler Johnson or Alex Killorn, and probably a pick. You can't include a first-round pick for Rasmus Ristolainen. It's anywhere between second round and below. anywhere between second round and below, and probably a combination of picks. But let's say you get rid of Tyler Johnson. So he's currently, Daily Faceoff has him as your second forward right wing. Who do you put there? You can move up Alex Killorn. You can put up Adam Ernie. Nolan Foote's not coming up. There's players who they can bring up. Taylor Radish, who will, he's not going to play second line minutes, but I'm saying you can move players up. Alex Killorn can move up. Matthew Joseph can move up. And you have players who can easily come in and replace those players. So it's not a matter of who you're giving up, because you have players in the system who can come up. It's a matter of what deal you're going to create to the Buffalo Sabres that work best for you and work best for Buffalo. Because actually, you know what? That work best for the Tampa Bay Lightning, because it doesn't even look like Rasmus Ristolainen has a spot next year. And you know what? I'm reading out these names. I could be completely overvaluing Rasmus Ristolainen, but I'm looking at the situation the Tampa Bay Lightning are in, where you're in cap hell essentially, and you need to get rid of someone. Now, what would be let's say I'm overvaluing Rasmus Ristolainen? What do the Tampa Bay Lightning say? Hey, see that Tyson Barrie, Colorado retained half of his salary? We're going to do the same thing. So we're looking at 2.7. Now his salary is 2.7. You include Tyler Johnson in the deal. Now you have how much extra cap space? $2.3 million extra cap space. And cap space is extremely valuable in the NHL. So let's say like this. Let's put an offer together. Rasmus Ristolainen for Tyler Johnson and a second round pick. And maybe a low round pick. I'm not sure. But Rasmus Ristolainen's salary has to be retained, half of it. Because then I don't think it's worth it for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Because it's not like their defense isn't good. Yes, they didn't have a good playoffs. They got swept. I'm looking at their defensemen, and the only place that they could improve is their second pairing right D, because that would move Eric Cernak to the fourth, which would make their right side Mikhail Sergachev, Rasmus Ristolainen, and Eric Cernak. And I have zero complaints with that. So there's a lot of things that have to go into a trade with the Tampa Bay Lightning. And it's more looking at the Tampa Bay Lightning, because the Buffalo Sabres are not don't have cap problems. They might down the road. They have $5 million in cap space. They have $5 million cap space. Next year, they have to re-sign Sam Reinhart. Zach Bogosian's contract's up. Marco Scandella's contract's up. They're probably going to take, if they re-sign, somewhere around the same. Brandon Montour's contract's up. So getting rid of the 5.4 might be helpful, because let's say you don't want to keep Tyler Johnson. Okay, flip him. Because I think any team who's looking for a second line winger, Tyler Johnson's your guy. Not only can Tyler Johnson play the wing, but he can also play down the middle. So you're looking for a third line center or a second line winger, or God forbid you need to replace your second line center, he's your guy. Now, how likely is it that this trade goes through? I'm not sure. But this is the team that I have constantly been hearing rumored to Rasmus Ristolainen. So if I'm going to have to put it out there, there's a good chance that this trade goes through. Now, what the trade looks like, I already gave what it looked like. I can't confirm anything. I'm not sure. but it probably includes a player who makes a nice amount of money going back to Buffalo. Potential destination number 2. The Edmonton Oilers. Now, I haven't seen this rumored a lot. To be honest, I haven't really seen it rumored at all. I was going through the teams. I'm like, what teams are looking for that type of player? I think this is a player that the Edmonton Oilers may look to bring in. Why? They need to make a splash. And I know it's just Rasmus Ristolainen. How much of a splash could that make? And you to be honest, you never know. I'm looking at their daily face-off lineup. They have Oscar Klefbom on the left, Adam Larsson on the right as their first defensive pairing, Darnell Nurse and Evan Bouchard as their second, Chris Russell and Matt Benning as their third. And honestly, yes, Evan Bouchard's a great player. I don't think he's going to be playing top 4 minutes next year. They need someone to kind of come in and be the bridge, that kind of gap. And yes, 3 years is a long time. Rasmus Ristolainen's deal is 3 years. Or there's 3 more years left. So how does Rasmus Ristolainen fit in on the Oilers? Next year, I could easily see him fitting in on the right side. Now, this deal, I think, would be a part of somewhat of a bigger package. My guess is, could it be part of a Ryan Nugent-Hopkins package? That would be huge for the Buffalo Sabres. I think it'd be a big loss for the Oilers, but it would bring in a player to solidify their top 4, kind of, with Oscar Klefbom and Adam Larsson, and then having Darnell Nurse and Rasmus Ristolainen. I think that kind of solidify that spot. Now, getting rid of Ryan Nugent-Hopkins on this team, I think that'd be a big deal. You'd have to bring someone in from Buffalo that you'd think would give some value. The first player that I look at is Sam Reinhart, who's 23. Now, has he lived up to expectations? Not necessarily. I think he could definitely be better within the next couple of years. There's like the players that are on UFA. There's be UFA in years. Vladimir Sobotka. I don't know if that's something you'd include. Connor Sheary maybe. Zemgus Girgensons. Johan Larsson. Scott Wilson. Definitely not Casey Middlestat. Even their defense, I'm not getting rid of anyone there. I thought maybe Alex Nylander would be an interesting player to put in that deal. I'm looking at their AHL, their non-roster forwards. I'm looking at a player like Rasmus Asplund, 21, 2 years left on a ELC. You can play him there. There's other players. Tage Thompson is a player you can include in a deal in that type of deal, but you're not going to Edmonton and saying, I want Ryan Nugent-Hopkins for Rasmus Ristolainen. And if Peter Chiarelli was still GM, I'd say, you know what, Jason Bartle, you call up Peter Chiarelli and say Ryan Nugent-Hopkins for Rasmus Ristolainen, and you know what, he might be crazy enough to say yes because he's the guy who traded Taylor Hall for Adam Larsson. But that's not what we're here to talk about. Now it's different than the last team I talked about with the Lightning, where the package is kind of not centered around Ristolainen. It'd be a 1 for, let's say, I guess 3 each type trade. This one would be centered around Rasmus Ristolainen, where you have Ryan Nugent-Hopkins going to Buffalo for let's see, who for like Rasmus Ristolainen and at least one prospect and a pick. Because, yes, I get it. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins maybe hasn't been the best. He's 26, still young. He's in his prime, and he's making $6 million for the next 2 years. So what's the problem? Does Edmonton want Rasmus Ristolainen? Because he has 3 years left. Evan Bouchard's coming up, and wouldn't be surprised to see him taking over a top 4 role in the next couple of years. Now you have Matt Benning as your third pairing. Now let's say you replace him with Rasmus Ristolainen. You have a third pairing defenseman making $5.4 million. I'm going to let that sink in. $5.4 million. Okay. There's a couple other scenarios that could possibly happen. Evan Bouchard progresses much better than people expect. Now, Adam Larsson there's 2 years left. Next season, let's say he's in his UFA year, he gets traded. Now let's say you put Rasmus Ristolainen or Evan Bouchard on your first pairing. You have a right side of, theoretically, if Matt Benning resigns, Rasmus Ristolainen, Evan Bouchard, and Matt Benning, which doesn't sound too bad, considering Evan Bouchard in 2 years, or in a year, will be 1 year older. He will be 20, going into 21. They'll also have Philip Broberg on the left, which would be interesting. Probably ends up replacing Chris Russell, who's put on the third pairing right now on Daily Faceoff. So they've drafted, and if they develop properly, they could have a good defense to at least build around. It's their forwards. Getting rid of Ryan Nugent-Hopkins isn't as easy as it sounds. Not because he's a bad player, because he put up 69 points last year. 28 goals and 41 assists. Sure, the year before, he had 48 points. The year before, he had 43 points. The year before that, 34. And then 2 years prior, the 2 years before that, 56 points in each. So, if I'm the Edmonton Oilers, sure, he maybe didn't have the best build-up. He's also been playing for the Edmonton Oilers, who have been basically a complete mess for the last while. This trade would be essentially a fresh start for Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. Probably end up centering behind Jack Eichel, which would push down, I think you'd have Casey Middlestat as your third line center. It's not like this trade would be wonderful for Buffalo. Right now, Casey Middlestat is your second line center. You bring in a player like Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. If you want, you can play Ryan Nugent-Hopkins on the wing. Right? So you can play him with you move Sam Reinhart down, you put Ryan Nugent-Hopkins up there, Jeff Skinner, Jack Eichel, and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, which would be a killer line, I think. But I don't think you do that. You put him on the second line, and he could honestly, he could probably man his own power play unit if he wanted to. But I put them down as a potential destination because the Edmonton Oilers, for now, need to solidify their defense. And if Evan Bouchard doesn't turn out to be what everyone thinks he is for this year, just for this year, not the future. I'm talking for the 2019-2020 season. They're not. And what are they going to have if Evan Bouchard doesn't even make the NHL? What are they going to have? It's going to be Clefbaum Larson, Darnell Nurse, Matt Benning, and Brandon Manning and Chris Russell as your three pairings. How does that sound? I would not like that. I would not like that if I were an Oilers fan. Yes, Clefbaum's good. Nurse has the potential. He's only 24. Larson, I think he's over, like, a lot of people don't like him because of the trade. But I think if you look at the trade alone, I think he's a good player too. But he's not a top 2 player. He's not a top 2 defenseman. So I put this team in again because they need to solidify the top 4. Connor McDavid is 22 and has made the playoffs 1 year. 1 year. This will be his 5th NHL season. And yes, I know he was injured for most of his first. So let's say 3 years. The best player, or if not the second best player in the NHL, depending on what side you're on, has made the playoffs once in the last 3 years and has scored 100 points. He scored 100 points in 2016-17, 108 points in 17-18, and scored 116 frickin' points in 2018-19. And they've been a lottery team the last 2 years. Oh my God. If this was the NBA, Connor McDavid would not be an Edmonton Oiler. I hope, like, that's known. I do not think Connor McDavid would be an Edmonton Oiler if the trades were done the same way as the NBA. So let me go back. Let me wrap this destination up. What would the trade look like? It'd be Ryan Nugent-Hopkins Ryan Nugent-Hopkins for Rasmus Ristolainen, a B prospect. So let's say Rasmus, or a forward prospect, maybe Rasmus Asplund, Tage Thompson, one of the two, whichever one, and a pick. Probably not a first. If you're Buffalo and you're giving up first round picks, I don't know what's going on. I really don't. You're giving up a pick, a prospect, and Rasmus Ristolainen to get Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. And the Edmonton Oilers solidify their second pairing, and the Buffalo Sabres finally get a second line center. Potential destination number 3. The Winnipeg Jets. Now, this is an interesting one because the Winnipeg Jets have their own problems I'll give you some names, Patrick Laine, Kyle Connor. Those 2 names, big names. They're both RFAs and are looking for some nice money to spend. So I don't know. You know what? I'm going to tell you why I put this team in my potential destinations, and it's for mainly one reason. This team lost 2 right-handed defensemen. Jacob Trouba did not want to be a Winnipeg Jet, and there's multiple reasons for that, and I think I'll get to that in another podcast, probably when he signs with the New York Rangers. So they had to trade Jacob Trouba for basically nothing, and they had they let Tyler Myers walk to free agency for nothing. Now, the trade was New York Rangers acquired Jacob Trouba, the signing rights, for the signing rights of Neil Pionk, who some argue is not even an NHL defenseman. I don't agree. I think he's probably at least bottom pairing. And their own first-round pick, which they gave up for Kevin Hayes. They got their own first-round pick back. 20th overall. Okay. I don't even know. I don't understand. To be honest, I don't even know where you'd start with, like, who would you get rid of? Because right now it's July 15th. They have 15 players on the roster. 7 forwards, 6 defense, and 2 goalies. Eric Comrie's not signed. Patrick Laine, Andrew Kopp, and Kyle Connor not signed. Neil Pionk not signed. Where do you start with a Rasmus Ristolainen deal? Now, some could argue, you know what? Winnipeg could just throw picks at Buffalo. Say, you know what? We'll give you a combination of picks, second round, third round picks. Sure, they could do that. They have $22 million in cap space. They have to sign all these players. Patrick Laine reportedly wants a short-term deal. So let's say you sign him at 3 years, which honestly would be perfect. If Patrick, I know if you trade for Rasmus Ristolainen and Patrick Laine signs at 3 years, you end at the same time. You end at the same time as Rasmus Ristolainen. You get that money. Number one, the cap will be much higher. Right now it's at 81.5. My guess is it's going to be, I'm not even going to take a guess, it's just going to be much higher. But if I'm the Buffalo Sabres and you're taking Rasmus Ristolainen from me, I'm thinking I'd like a player back. I'd like someone back who, okay, fine, doesn't play in the NHL this year, maybe plays in the NHL in the next couple of years. You have to go to their AHL team or their non-roster forwards to go to say, okay, you're giving up a player, someone like Mason Appleton, probably didn't turn out as well, but he's still 23, probably not going to play in the NHL this year. He might, with the way things are going, he just might. And to be honest, I'm looking at this team. Blake Wheeler makes $8.25 million for till 2023-24. And that's a lot of money. And he's 32. He's 32. How old will he be at the end? 32, 33, 4, 36, and making 8.25. Okay. Oh boy. Brian Little, 5.2 basically, or closer to 5.3. Same year. He's 31. Not even close to the same player as Blake Wheeler. That's a tough one. Matthew Perreault, 4.125 this year and next year. So they have some hefty contracts that, sure, they could get rid of. I don't think Buffalo wants to take those contracts because I said this earlier. Next year's not going to be easy. Sam Reinhart's a RFA. Casey Middlestad's an RFA. Jake McCabe's still an RFA. Next year, Brandon Montour will be an RFA. Plus the 6 UFAs on forward alone. And Zach Bogosian, Marco Scandella, Hunwick, and Casey Nelson on defense they have to re-sign. So I don't think Buffalo are in a position to say, okay, give me Brian Little, and maybe you can give me some more prospects and some nice picks, because they have their own shit to deal with in the next couple of years. I don't even know where to start, because if I'm Buffalo, I'm saying you don't want to give me a first round pick, but I know no team would give a first round pick. So if in this scenario is going to be extremely different than the rest of the scenarios, because there's actual players that could be traded. In this scenario, I can't think of players that would be traded. This, I think, would mainly be a picks deal, and you'd just be using cap space. You're looking at some second round pick. I think a couple second round picks. I don't think it's possible that a team would give the Buffalo Sabres a first round pick for Rasmus Ristolainen. I really don't think that's possible. You look at some other trade. You look at what Colin Miller got, a second and a fifth, and you're like, how much better is Rasmus Ristolainen than Colin Miller? Some would argue they're pretty close. If that's the case, how much more are you getting for Rasmus Ristolainen? I'm just going to put 2 second round picks out there. Maybe it's 2 seconds and then a third, or 2 seconds and a fourth. That's the most. If I'm Winnipeg and they don't want to take a big contract from me, that's what I'm giving them. I'm not going to completely sell the farm. I'm not giving up any of the RFAs. There's Eric Comrie, not giving him up. And of the player that stands out to me most still on an ELC in the AHL is Christian Vesalainen, who they drafted last year, or no, 2 years ago now, 24th overall. Played 22 games with Manitoba, finished with 13 points. Played 31 games in the KHL, finished with 17 points. Not bad for a 20-year-old. So I'm not giving up much. But I'm looking at this team as I'm looking strictly at the defensive pairings. Josh Morrissey and Dustin Byfuglien as your first pairing. That's not being touched. Dmitry Kulikov and Sami Niku as your second pairing. And Tucker Poolman and Neil Pionk as your third. That's a little worrying for me, because you had a right side of Byfuglien, Trouba, and Myers, and now you don't. And it's not like you downgrade a little bit. You're really downgraded. Putting Rasmus Ristolainen even in Sami Niku's spot, and moving Sami Niku, moving Neil Pionk somewhere in your defensive pairings, wouldn't be the worst case scenario. I think that improves their D. To be honest, I think it would improve their D. It spreads it out. Sami Niku's 22. And he split the year with NHL and AHL time. I think he needs one more year at the third pairing. So let me wrap this destination up, and then I have one more. I know I've been talking for 45 minutes, but by adding Rasmus Ristolainen to this team, you're adding a okay player to their top four, which they need because they lost Tyler Myers and Jacob Trouba. I believe they've really downgraded. They have really downgraded. And I get it. Rasmus Ristolainen isn't the best player in the world. He's okay. But it's better than what they'd have. It is better than what they'd have. And this situation in Winnipeg is different from the other situations I've mentioned and the next situation I mentioned, because you can give up, you can only give picks. I can't see a combination of player, prospect, and pick that you'd be able to give up. Potential destination number 4. I have the Calgary Flames. And I put them because I think it'd be an interesting one. Not the most realistic, probably the least realistic, but I think it's worth at least talking about. Now, the Calgary Flames have 2 interesting expiring contracts in TJ Brodie and Travis Hamonic. I think in both scenarios, you're not trading them 1-for-1. Buffalo's probably adding a little bit. Maybe you'll see Calgary add a little bit, depending on what Buffalo adds. It's an interesting trade to get Calgary a defenseman with term, because I'm not sure if TJ Brodie and Travis Hamonic are re-signing in Calgary. It's been rumored, and I think it's basically been confirmed that the Leafs had a deal in place to send Kadri and plus to the Calgary Flames for I believe it was TJ Brodie. I'm not sure if it was plus or if it was just straight for TJ Brodie. But Kadri said no because he has a modified no trade clause. So it seems that maybe TJ Brodie may be on the move from the Calgary Flames. Would he be a good fit in Buffalo? 1 year left. Would he want to resign? Is a tricky question. But he'd definitely be an improvement over Rasmus Ristolainen. I strongly believe that he would be a improvement over Rasmus Ristolainen. Now, he does have a modified no-trade clause. He submits an 8-team no-trade list. I'm going by the assumption that the Buffalo Sabres are not on this list. So what does that mean? I think a trade that would be TJ Brodie to the Buffalo Sabres would include something similar to the Ryan Nugent-Hopkins trade. Now, I think Ryan Nugent-Hopkins is a better player, and you're going to get more for Ryan Nugent-Hopkins than you're going to get for TJ Brodie. TJ Brodie is 29, and he'll be 30 by the time free agency starts next year. Will he resign in Buffalo? That's not what is part of my equation. What will he do for the Buffalo Sabres? You throw him on the first pairing with Rasmus Dahlin. I think that'd be quite interesting. Then you'd still have Jake McCabe and Brandon Montour, Marco Scandella, Colin Miller. Plus, you have Henry Jokiharju in the AHL, and you could bring him up. You want to play him instead of Colin Miller. You want to move someone moves to the left, someone moves to the right. Well, it depends. But what I'm looking at is Rasmus Dahlin and TJ Brodie would be an interesting top pair for the Buffalo Sabres. Now, their forward core would not be touched. Their forward core who are currently on their daily faceoff page, I don't think would be touched. Now, I said last time that you're probably including a guy like maybe Rasmus Asplund. Maybe I don't think you're touching Tage Thompson, to be honest. So let's say Rasmus Asplund. You have Rasmus Ristolainen, Rasmus Asplund, and a lower pick, probably 3rd or 4th round pick, that goes for TJ Brodie. I think that could be an interesting trade. Do I think it's realistic? It's realistically going to happen? Probably not, because I don't think the Buffalo Sabres are looking to create a package that includes Ristolainen to bring in another right-handed defenseman. And I believed that because look who they brought in: Colin Miller and Henry Jokiharju. It doesn't match what's going on. But I think it'd be an interesting trade to see play out. And you're giving the Buffalo Sabres, I think, could be at least a 3, if not a 2, who plays with Rasmus Dahlin. A proper player who could play with Rasmus Dahlin, not Ristolainen. Who is not Ristolainen. But it's just, I find it really hard to believe that something like this would happen. But what would make this interesting for Calgary is that they do have a player with term. Because next year, Brody's a UFA, Hamonic's a UFA, Michael Stone is a UFA, Rasmus Anderson is getting off his ELC, and Oliver Killington is getting off his ELC. So it's not like I think they might prefer some players with term. We'll see what happens with it. The deal would look different, but you could make a deal around Travis Hamonic. Would you include a pick and a prospect? Probably not. Probably just a pick and Ristolainen and a prospect. You're not including the pick. Honestly, I don't think Hamonic is as good as Brody. I think Brody's better. I'd like to remind people that Noah Hanifin is on a $4.95 million contract and plays on the second pair with Travis Hamonic right now. So you'd basically have, let's say this trade went through, Mark Giordano, Travis Hamonic as your first pairing, Noah Hanifin, Rasmus Ristolainen as your second, and Juuso Välimäki and Rasmus Anderson as your third. I think that's a good defensive pairing. That's good. Those are good defensive pairings for the NHL. With a team that won the that finished first place in the Western Conference last year, maybe they want to try something a little bit different. But they bring in another forward prospect or a pick, and they bring in a second pairing defenseman. And there's another reason why I think this trade won't go through, because either way, Brody makes 4.6, Hamonic makes 3.8, so you're taking on salary. You only have 9.4 in projected cap space. Still have to sign Sam Bennett, who will probably take a bridge short-term deal, lower value, and Matthew Tkachuk, who's part of the insane RFA market this year. So it'd be interesting to see what happens with those players first. I don't think Calgary will be doing anything drastic before dealing with that situation. Thank you for listening to another episode of the JB Show. Please leave a comment. Let me know where you think Rasmus Ristolainen is being traded, because sure, I only gave 4 teams. He's being traded somewhere. I don't know where yet, but I'd like to know where you think he'll be traded. Let me know what you think the package would be for Rasmus Ristolainen. Let me know what you think of my predictions, because I'm not always right. Thank you.